Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a great time. I hope that everyone's had a fantastic last 48 hours. I hope that you had a wonderful and safe early start to your week. Lord knows I did. Plenty of stuff going on at work for me, but I also got a lot of rest, some much needed rest yesterday, so that's very nice. I hope that you guys are liking the new thumbnail too. It's not perfect as much to my dislike, but I also didn't want to start the stream much later than we already did. So, but we are going to be trying to play around with some new features, some new stuff to put on here, you know, kind of work on some detail work a little bit, because it's a little bland for my taste, and I'm sure that goes for you guys too. But there's just some stuff we want to work on, and so it takes some time, unfortunately. And new stuff always sometimes causes delay because I'm not the most inclined person with technology. So, but regardless of that, I hope you've had a wonderful 48 hours. There's been a lot of news coming out. There's been a lot of news, especially when it comes to Ukraine. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. A lot of this, luckily, we can help. And that's because a lot of this stuff is causing humanitarian crises. And I'm talking about not just obviously conflicts that are going on, but also other things. There's severe climate change that's taking place in the world right now, causing major amounts of damage to agricultural land. In fact, in some places, as much as 30% of arable land has actually been destroyed through severe climate change at this point. And so a lot of these places have had their rations cut. A lot of places that were already suffering from food and water insecurities. But luckily, you guys have made this an awesome community, and we can actually help with this. So if you guys go in and you check out the description below, you're going to see the whole point of this project. And the point of this project is to help people and be the news that gives back. We want to give back to the very topics we talk about day in and day out on this channel. And so if you check out the video description, you're going to see a ton of different links for different humanitarian organizations. And we are always looking for more. In fact, we're vetting some as we speak. And so if you go on, you'll also find our actual website, and you'll also find our Discord. Best way to get a hold of the staff members is through our Discord. If you go, of course, you can check out the community we have on there, but you'll also be able to get a hold of a staff member. And please send us more links. Please send us more additional organizations, and we will try and get them vetted and try to get them added to the stream. The two things we have for all of our links that are down here are going to be the fact that 80% or more of their donations actually go to helping people. So that means that 80% or more go directly to the programs. Only 20% or less actually goes to salaries and administration's costs. So the other thing, and of course a very important thing for you as a viewer, is the fact that all of these have been vetted by us. We make sure that these are credible organizations that you're donating to, that these are organizations that you can go independently of us and go and vet them. And and unfortunately, when it comes to a situation like this, and situations like what we're talking about, while a vast majority of people do legitimately want to help, there is unfortunately a number of people who find that these are an opportunity. Now, people with suffering are an opportunity. Human trafficking is a major issue, and of course, people being taken advantage of are a major issue. Unfortunately, when Ukraine announced that they would be accepting foreign fighters, there are a lot of people that were going around and producing scams trying to get money as a foreign fighter or a supposed foreign fighter. That was not necessarily true. And same thing with humanitarian organizations. Some just aren't as good as what they seem up front. So please be careful. I highly advise that you go and you look at internet fraud. We have a post. We actually have a post on our Discord with a link that goes directly to the internet fraud page for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We try to protect you as viewers, but the best thing is to protect yourselves as well. And with that, when it comes to these organizations that are credible, please make sure that if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's totally fine. Give us a like and subscribe and let your friends know about us. The more people that you guys let know, because the best way to really grow this is through word of mouth, and it's from you, the community. And the more people that are here ultimately means that the more people can pitch in and help with these organizations, and the bigger impact we can have as a community. And that's really what we want to do. We would even prefer, even more so, if we could get actual fundraisers onto the channel, and that takes a certain amount of people and a whole lot of other things, but we want to be able to do that. So please let your friends know about us. That's what we want to do here. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never going to be pushing merchandise or anything. 100% of everything we do here goes directly to helping people. So with that, I hope you guys will help us in that endeavor. Thank you for the support you've already given these organizations and continue to give us. And without further ado, we're going to dive right into the news. And there's plenty of stuff happening here in Ukraine, which is our special report. And there is just a ton of stuff, especially going on here in the Donbass. But first thing we have is that there's an Associated Press interview with Tara, who is the medic from Mariupol who was released. She was one of the very first people to be released. She was captured before the fall of the Azovstal when she was trying to assist some civilians leaving the city itself through the blockade. They were captured, but she has given an interview to the Associated Press that's quite impactful. So you guys, so we're going to go ahead and take a look.
Ukrainian medic Yulia Paevska, better known as Tyra, used a body cam to document the unfolding horrors in Mariupol. She didn't know the footage would one day help set her free.
Я делала все, что могла вот в госпитале, принимать этих раненых. Как я это делала, видели вы. Спасибо вам за то, что вы сделали, вы вытащили эту флешку. И благодаря вам, тем, кто этим занимался, удалось вытащить меня из этого ада.
The day after AP journalists smuggled her memory card with 256 gigabytes of footage out of Mariupol in a tampon, Tyra was captured by pro-Russian forces in mid-March. She was trying to help a group of people, mostly children, leave the besieged city.
Они меня узнали, сходили куда-то, позвонили, вернулись. Насколько я помню, и у них уже был план какой-то. Дальше я рассказывать не могу.
Tyra lost more than 22 pounds while in captivity for 3 months. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced her release on June 17th, following a prisoner exchange.
І наостанок, сьогодні вже можу повідомити про це. Вдалося звільнити з полону Тайру, українського парамедика Юлію Паєвську.
In an interview with the AP, she chooses her words carefully out of fear for the other Ukrainian prisoners, including the 21 women she lived with in a tiny cell.
Очень доставала всех женщин, ну вот особенно женщин, которые находились со мной в камере, вот в этой крайней, где я находилась. И так им тяжело, они не знают, что с детьми, условия содержания ужасные. И на них постоянно кричат, их постоянно оскорбляют. Рассказывают, что Украина ваша уже пала давно, что все сбежали.
Tyra says she was accused of being a Nazi collaborator, killing people and abusing Russian soldiers. But her body cam footage published by the AP told a different story, showing Tyra treating Ukrainian and Russian soldiers alike.
Мне уже неприятно, потому что со мной обращались гораздо хуже. Но даже это меня коробит.
So we're going to go ahead and stop it there. But you guys can obviously see, so she's was immensely influential when it came to the Battle of Mariupol. She was extremely influential in the insights that we have into Mariupol. There's not a whole lot of information that could come out of the city. There was, during the siege of Mariupol, and especially now under the occupation, there's very limited quantities of information we can get, just because all the infrastructure was destroyed that would allow us normally to get information. Pretty much anyone that was a journalist would have fled, with the exception of 2, and they ended up fleeing while they still had the ability to there at the very end. But quite a lot of information is still lost, and we're still finding out bits and pieces. And the footage in what she's said and what she's saying in these interviews is really giving us a glimpse into what was happening there in Mariupol as the city was under siege. And we can see quite a lot of pretty harsh footage that was coming out of Mariupol, of course. But it would be an understatement to say that the situation in there was absolutely deplorable. And to say, Mariupol doesn't exist in all intents and purposes. It's been wiped off the face of the earth, and it's quite horrendous, to say the least. There is some good news coming out of here. That's because the Netherlands is going to provide aid to pay for teachers, doctors, and pensioners. The Netherlands will provide Ukraine with 200 million euros for payment for teachers, doctors, and pensioners. This was a statement made by the Prime Minister Mark Rutte in Kyiv when he met with Volodymyr Zelensky. So fantastic news. Doctors and teachers and, of course, paying people's pensions is always important. A lot of people pretty much lost everything in this war, to include their life savings. So being able to pay those individuals so that they have something to live on is definitely, I mean, it's a less talked about concern, but it is definitely a major concern nonetheless. But we start to get into the fighting, and the first thing we have is actually up here in the Kharkiv Oblast, is behind Russian lines. This is Hoptivka. Hoptivka is a little city here, and as you can see, this has actually been a geolocated point. Hoptivka is a little bit of a smaller village, but a village nonetheless. And we can see this point is taken right about here. So this is the general location of where a Russian artillery battery was located and was subsequently destroyed by Russian forces, and we actually have the footage of that. So let's go ahead and take a look. Please keep in mind, though, during this footage, the location of this, because this is very important to know. Russia accuses constantly of Ukrainian forces posting their military facilities inside of civilian infrastructure, which we usually don't see a whole lot of. Not to say it doesn't happen, but we just don't see a lot of it, probably for a lot of reasons, for when it does happen. But what we do see is the Russians utilizing civilian infrastructure heavily, including for what we'll be getting to here later. But you can see here, these are artillery guns stationed right here inside of a city. This is inside of a village here, being used, which is against the Geneva Convention, to say the least. And take a look. Now, what does this do? This footage forces the Ukrainians to have to shell their own villages and cause civilian casualties with artillery just to knock out Russian artillery guns. This is the same thing that we're hearing about when we're talking about Zaporizhia, the Zaporizhia nuclear facility over here in Enerhodar. In order to hit Russian artillery guns, Ukrainian artillery has to risk hitting the nuclear facility in Zaporizhia and causing a massive nuclear catastrophe in the process. So that's why you can't do this. And you can see there, the shot, it's artillery, it's indirect fire. This thing isn't the most, your standard artillery rounds are not the most accurate things in the world. I mean, you can get it to a point within so many meters of your target, and you have an effective kill radius and effective, casualty radius. But you don't have, it's not precision. It's not every round for the 155, being used is going to be that X caliber round. There's only a limited quantity of those. Those are very precision guided munitions. They're very expensive. They're very limited in quantity, and you can only use so many of them. And so, these artillery guns, most of these aren't going to have, X caliber rounds. Most of these are going to have your standard, HE artillery rounds. They're just, they're accurate more so than what they had, but they're still artillery nonetheless. So you jump down here into Slavyansk. We can see that tonight Slavyansk is getting shelled yet again. This is because Slavyansk is probably one of the next major objectives for the Russian forces. Now, having captured the Luhansk region, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk have received an immense amount of shelling. Russian doctrine basically can be broken down into very oversimplified 3 phases. These 3 phases consist of 1, a precursor bombardment of the area meant to soften up resistance and destroy morale. The second phase of an attack is likely going to be an armored mechanized assault. That armored and mechanized assault pushes through with a mechanized spearhead with your tank units, your T-72s, your T-80s, your T-90s, T-62s at this point, and also your BMP, your heavily mechanized units. In fact, Russia doesn't even employ light infantry units. Everything is mechanized or motorized. So that follow-on, that third phase, is more of a continuation of the second phase, and that's going to be once the armored spearheads, the tanks, break through Ukrainian lines or break through hostile lines of defense. They then allow for encirclement movements, and those gaps in the line can now be exploited by lighter units, so those infantry units, those motorized units, in order to basically do a cleanup of whatever's left, a mop up, and then continue on from there. We don't see this doctrine put into actions very often. In reality, doctrine is just a baseline, but you can see its general ideas, being utilized, and that's heavy bombardments, which is immediately followed by a heavy mechanized assault. If it's a major city, the infantry are going in there and they're going to do house-to-house fighting. It's going to be extremely brutal. We've seen that repeated in multiple locations. We've seen it in Mariupol. We've seen it in Severodonetsk. We see it in Lysychansk, and we will likely be seeing it here in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. We will likely also be seeing it in Bakhmut, which we'll get to later. But this is because these two cities, especially Kramatorsk, are major railheads and crossroads for Ukrainian supply lines. Doing this and taking Slavyansk and Kramatorsk now also allows for a wider encirclement movement to trap Ukrainian forces, which already escaped encirclement movements up here in the Luhansk region. This would be an even bolder attempt to encircle, probably not going to be as successful as we've seen large encirclements being failures thus far by the Russian forces, but it is probably the game plan nonetheless, and cutting off the vital supply lines from Kramatorsk are essential for Russians in order to degrade Ukrainian forces' capability to fight and hold up the front lines here. As we move into Lysychansk, we have a couple of different things. We actually get a video of one of the M777A2s which has been destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Now, we don't know how many M777s have been destroyed. The M777 is the 155mm NATO artillery round, or NATO artillery gun, towed artillery gun, which has been employed and sent to Ukraine in Lend-Lease acts. And these are... We simply don't know the extent to which the losses have been on these. We can safely assume that essentially there's been a loss on essentially everything, I would say, with the exception of HIMARS, with some relative certainty, just because of the range and standoff that those have. But these are much more commonly fielded now, and these are in a much greater number, and these are going to be having been destroyed and probably, in some capacities, even in limited numbers, but they will have taken losses at this point in the war with them.
Американская пушечка М777 155 мм.
But we know that's done a number on the Russians too. And the way we know that is, I can't believe this. So I have talked extensively about how obsolete the T-62 is. And I get it, in the day of anti-tank guided missiles, a tank is a tank, right? But we've talked about the Russians and how they're pulling out older and older, more and more obsolete materials as their stockpiles and their storages run low. And, I said, and one of the things I said is they physically won't pull T-55s or T-54s because they sold them all, and they were pretty much all destroyed during the first and second invasion of Iraq and in the war in Afghanistan. Like, all of the T-55s that they had in stock, what they have left are essentially all just museum pieces. They're not very good tanks whatsoever. It's the very early part of the Cold War. They're just not good. They're the immediate follow-ups to the IS-2s and IS-3s that were developed late World War II. But what they would have is a massive amount of T-34s left. And there are T-34s on monuments everywhere in Europe. And I said that would have to be what they would jump to next. Well, they did. The T-34 has now been mobilized. This T-34 was on display here in Lysychansk, as there are many displayed all across Europe. They have officially they fired this thing up. They took it off of the pedestal, off of where it was at, on display, and they're now using it at a roadblock in Lysychansk. I cannot make this up. We just take a look. This is a T-34. This is a long-barreled T-34, so it's a later war model, but this is a T-34 built for World War II. This tank defeated Nazi Germany. Like that is unbelievably, there's no words for this. The Russians have run out of tanks. They can't even put an old T-62 in order to use it at this roadblock. I don't even know if they have T-34 ammunition in the arsenal anymore, because they've been destroying obsolete ammunition. They had ammunition at the end of the Cold War. They had ammunition still from the early 1900s but they didn't even have the guns for it anymore. They got rid of them so long ago, and Russia doesn't get rid of anything. Russia is essentially the hoarders of war materials, and they are pulling out a T-34 off of its pedestal mount and have now moved it into position at a roadblock.
Это как понимать? Он что, сам ехал, что ли? Ничего себе. Нормально.
I want that to sink in. They couldn't even put a T-62 here for this roadblock. They had to put a T-34. That is insane. That means that they physically just don't have the war materials anymore. They just don't have the equipment. There is no other reason why you would put a T-34 at a roadblock, at a checkpoint. There isn't. There's none. There is no reason. There is no way this thing should ever see active engagement or combat ever again. Ever. The T-34 was mass-produced so fast. It was a tank that was good enough. That was the point. Much like the Sherman tank, the T-34 was good enough. It was better than the T-26s that they had. It was better, it was better than all of their early pre-war tanks that they had, right? But it was just good enough. In fact, the armor plating was so poorly put together on most of the T-34s that they were notorious that their armor plating wouldn't even conjoin properly in some places, and you could actually put your finger in holes in between the armor plating because it was just good enough. And this thing has been pulled off its pedestal mount in Lysychansk and is now being staged at a roadblock. That's it. If anyone here believes that the Russians have yet to field their best equipment, I hate to break it to you. They have fielded all of their best equipment, and it's been destroyed so fast that they are already having to use World War II materials. Kaysen, amazing comment. Tsar Cannon next. Yes. I don't even think, you gotta think, after Operation Barbarossa, there is no T-26s anymore. Like, those are gone. The KV-1 was never produced in enough numbers, and they were all destroyed during, they never produced enough, they were all destroyed during the early part of World War II. The T-34 is it. They don't have anything else. That's it. That's the end of their production line. Everything they were ever given prior to World War II, destroyed in Operation Barbarossa. They didn't really employ tanks until the mid-war period. They never really had any. They never used them effectively anyway. I mean, look at Finland, guys. I mean, seriously, their BTR series, terrible. Their BT series tanks, terrible. But they're fast. Those are their fast tanks. But they don't have anything left. There's nothing else. They would have to pull out ceremonial field artillery guns from the Napoleonic Wars. There's nothing left. The only thing else that I could physically think they start pulling is actual museum pieces, like the mouse that they have, because the Russians have the only mouse ever produced by Nazi Germany, and they have the only one, and it's built on the chassis of one and the turret of another, because both variants were so destroyed during their testing that they physically couldn't use just one of them. They had to mismatch two. So that's it. That's it. Russia has fielded everything, and they're now pulling World War II vehicles off their monuments. That's it. That's where we're at now in the war. We've seen Maxim machine guns. We have seen the Mosin-Nagants, and we can make whatever arguments we want on those. But this This has no argument. This is it. This is the end of the Russian era of being an armored force. The Russians have taken so many casualties, they just can't do it anymore. And this is just one example. This is one example. They're pulling T-62s. That was enough of an example for me. This isn't seeing active combat, at least. Whatever happened to the... So, Demise FPS says, whatever happened to the deployment of their Terminators? We saw some footage of them in PAP. So, their Terminator tanks, yeah, I don't know. I really don't. I can't imagine that they probably have done very well if they are employed. We do know that they're using the TOS-1. They have been for a while, the flamethrower variant. But their Terminator, I haven't seen any active footage of them. So I even follow Russian news too, just to try and keep it equal here, and also just to make sure I'm covering all of the bases here. But I haven't seen even any footage from RT, Taz, RIA, or anything else regarding the Terminator tank. I just don't know. I don't think they have enough of them. I think it's one of those things where it's like at a T14 Armada, which we also haven't seen yet in the war. And I think that's because the T14 Armada is actually so unreliable as a tank that they apparently would rather field the T34 from World War II before they would rather field a T14 Armada. That should tell you where their thoughts and feelings are on the T14 itself. But we haven't seen it during the war either. I don't think they've built them in enough numbers probably to really... they cost so much, and they've built them in so few numbers that it's not really... It's a risk assessment. You have to still do a risk... Even Russia, in all of its insanity, has to do a risk assessment at some point and say, we cannot afford to lose the X number of T-14s we have built because they cost so much it would bankrupt our nation. And same thing, like they would be irreplaceable to Russia. They can't even upgrade all their T-72s, let alone T-14s, and field them. And I'm sure the Terminator tank is in the same boat. But that's enough for my rant on the T-34 usage. I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. T-14 never really had full scale production, don't have spare parts, etc. Never really passed the full prototype. So that's true. The T-14 isn't in full production. It is still in technically a prototype phase. The T14 Armada is a new generation of main battle tank that has been produced by the Russian Federation. It still features an autoloader. In fact, it actually essentially completely removes crew out of the actual turret compartment and puts them in their own internal capsule inside the forward glacis of the vehicle. They still use an autoloader, which is great for what it's intended to do, but we obviously can see the drawbacks of autoloaders here whenever we see those sympathetic detonations. That's what's causing those turrets to fly. That armor or that ammunition that's readied to go has to be exposed inside of the turret, and whenever you see these turrets flying off, it's because whatever is hitting these vehicles, whether that's an anti-tank guided missile or another tank, is penetrating it. It's sending sparks everywhere. It's igniting the ammunition that's underneath and in the cylindrical autoloader, and it's causing it to detonate too. The T-14 retains that. It sits at a higher profile, which makes that obsolete, because the reason for Russia having an autoloader, despite the drawbacks, is because the Russian Federation, and alongside that, obviously the Soviet Union, intended to fight a war with the NATO alliance. And when you're talking about fighting a war with the NATO alliance, the T-72, the T-80, the T-90 all make very good sense. They're intended to fight a war with NATO, and at the time of their development, the biggest threat on the battlefield to a tank was another tank. So NATO vehicles generally have a higher profile. They have a much larger profile. The T-72, the T-80, T-90 remain a low profile, which is great for fighting on the steppes of the Russian plains. And which is all of this. This is it. So when you're talking about that, the autoloader feature maintains they maintain a lower number of crew, whereas most NATO vehicles required a crew of 4. The Russians can have a crew of 3. They also can field more of them, so they can take those losses, once again, using blood for time. And they can fire 9 rounds a minute with an autoloader, which means they can fire 9 times, which is faster than the average firing rate of a NATO vehicle, such as the M1 Abrams, and as well as the Leopard 1, the Leopard 2, the Merkava even, and which is an Israeli tank. But that all of those together, it's a harder target to hit for another tank. It has a lower profile, and it can fire faster, and there have more of them. That makes it great for a fight against NATO on the Russian steppe in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It doesn't necessarily retain that now. Yeah, Demise. He said, Demise FPS says, only footage I saw was a video clip of a few of them around Popasna. I think it was probably for show, and that's regarding the Terminators. Yeah, I don't really see a whole lot of them, or I haven't seen really any of them. And once again, I just don't think they're very vastly used, or they're probably being employed for reasons other than what they were produced to do, because they're taking such heavy losses that they have to fill gaps. And that's not a great place to be. It's much like if you've ever heard of the Skink. The Skink was basically an M4 Sherman that had instead of having the 75 millimeter main gun in the turret, they remounted it. This is a Canadian vehicle, by the way. They remounted it with, I want to say, 450 caliber machine guns, essentially, the anti-aircraft variants, so they had a higher rate of fire, and also they could maneuver the turret faster. They upgraded the turret motors, and it didn't it never shot down a plane, which is its intended target. But the Canadians loved it because when it got deployed to them and they got it overseas in Europe for field testing, in which case they just used it in combat because World War II is happening at the time. It was great as an infantry support vehicle. They loved it as an infantry support vehicle. They thought it was awesome, but they only built 2. They never mass produced it. But they had to use it to fill a gap that they needed because they didn't have the support vehicles because theirs had been destroyed in the battle previously already. Because it's like one of their 3rd attempts or something at taking the position. And but they already had enough support vehicles in the Allied powers anyway that they didn't need another one. But the Skink never shot down a plane, but it filled a gap. And it would be kind of like that. The Terminators are probably filling a gap that the Russian forces have taken crippling losses in, and they probably don't want to risk it. And they also probably aren't using it for its intended purpose to begin with. Anyway, getting back to the news here. We're going to jump over here into Luhansk, where we can see another ammunition depot has been hit by the Russians, or by the Ukrainians. This is the 5th ammunition depot hit just today, and this is the first time the city of Luhansk has been hit. Luhansk is a large city. It's used as a major hub for Russian logistics and command and control networks. And this is the first time that the city has been hit since the war actually began.
А там у нас, наверное, ПВО стоит.
Да?
Наверное.
This ammunition depot had rockets. If you can't tell, that's what's firing over here. Is rockets. They're setting off rockets and they're launching themselves in each individual direction. So obviously, being this deep behind lines, this would have been a HIMARS strike. And you have another video here. A significant ammo depot that was there in the Luhansk. Now, when you talk about the destruction of ammunition depots, really their losses are not exceptionally great. It's just a small fraction. Well, every loss of an ammunition depot, what's the point of doing an ammunition depot near the front lines? It's so that way trucks can do more trips in a shorter amount of time and get more ammo to the front. They can carry more ammo and use less fuel, and it's pre-staged. So there's probably, maybe a week's worth of ammunition at that depot, if that. But now that ammunition depot has been destroyed, those trucks, those supply trucks, now have to drive further. So the trucks that were here, now they have to go all the way here, grab ammunition from Russia, and bring it all the way to the front lines instead of they take the trip from Russia to Luhansk, and then a truck probably brings it from Luhansk over to Alchevsk, and then over to Horlivka, and then to the front lines, or something like that. Just as a general idea. Each truck, it doesn't use less trucks, but it makes it shorter trips, meaning you can carry more, you can do it faster. And destroying the ammunition depots means that those trucks now can carry less ammo, they can do less trips, they can, they're burning more fuel, and it takes longer for them to do so. So your troops are getting supplied less often, there's longer times between resupplies, and they're still fighting, so they're still burning ammunition at roughly the same rate. I mean, it goes up and down, but roughly speaking, they're burning ammunition at a fairly consistent rate, especially when you're talking about these artillery guns, which are firing excessive amounts of ammunition for a war. Then they're depleting their stocks very quickly. Those batteries need to be reloaded and refit very often, and they simply can't do it because they're not getting the ammunition to them that they need to. Move over here to Bakhmut, where civilian areas are being hit tonight. So Russian forces are striking residential areas in Bakhmut in response to some very significant hits on some of these ammo depots, which we'll continue to get into. But the Ukrainian woman filming in this says, "Fuck, my mom is there. This is fucked." That is the translation that we got from our in-house translator here. And take a look.
Блядь, Коля, там же мамка бьет. Ебучий слух, ёб твою мать, блядь. Пиздец. Коль.
Это просто пизда, все горит, блядь. О, свет въебали, глянь, провода уже.
Где это?
Это ступки, блядь, Санина сторона.
Это пиздец.
Дай я маме наберу.
Это пиздец.
Маме набрать, нет? Пиздец. Саня,
ты чё, ёбнулся? Не надо так говорить, Коля, не надо так говорить. Ты чё?
And Bakhmut is probably getting it for dual purpose too. It's not just a retaliation. Tonight was especially obviously pretty large scale. But Bakhmut is another sector in which the Russians are attempting to take. They've been trying to take it for some time now, and they've been slowly pushing towards Bakhmut, but they are coming up against extremely stiff resistance in this area, and we've seen where they're using a lot of bombardments against Bakhmut and the surrounding cities, such as Chasiv Yar, in order to try and soften up that resistance. But once again, the Bakhmut and the surrounding area is getting precursor bombardments that are really putting some strain on it. It does not help that the main highway, the Lysychansk-Bakhmut highway, is effectively cut off, and this whole area is essentially just continually under shelling. So just especially pretty bad tonight, and probably for that reason in retaliation for some of these strikes we had today. Speaking of Chasiv Yar, we have an update regarding the death toll rising from the apartment building collapse that occurred after it was struck by a Russian missile. The number of dead has risen to 38, including one child thus far. And this is when the Iskander M hit the apartment complex.
Блядь! Сука! Ёбаный в рот! Пизда.
So we move further down into the Donbass here as we take a look at this, and this is from a Ukrainian medic, field medic. And what has happened here is the fact that, fortunately, this Ukrainian soldier has survived, but the bullet penetrated the helmet and was lodged between the scalp and the skull. So this is from their x-ray. And this is the kind of injuries that you're talking about every day, multiple times a day, day in and day out for a Ukrainian field medic. So this is happening all across the line, hundreds of troops a day on both sides. They're getting pretty significant, and that's not the only kinds of injuries. Casualty injury, traumatic injuries are very gruesome in nature, and that is not something I would like to see day in and day out. As we move down here to Avdiivka, we can see another logistical nightmare has occurred as another logistical center was destroyed. This one is just another further destruction of Russian capability to resupply forces. This looks like it's closer to the front. And we can see in some of these pictures here what's happening. Obviously, multiple strikes as multiple areas are burning. And it's back to medieval hygiene at this point, as most of these areas have been shelled so much that you have no longer any kind of electricity or running water or gas or anything like that. So you have to wash yourself, your clothes, and your dishes all in the rain, because that's all that's left. And you just take a look.
А так-то мы вдвоем с ним тащим. Как дуры, тяжело капец.
Зачем? А сейчас волку, когда есть дождь.
Вот именно.
Я вспоминаю все.
Pretty ridiculous. As we jump down here into Mariupol, we have a couple of different developments right now. The exhumation of remains continues. The Russians are exhuming mass graves that were created by the Ukrainian forces and authorities at the beginning of the war and during the besiegement of Mariupol. The individuals here were a lot of these individuals. They buried people everywhere. They were running out of room to bury people. They buried them in parks. They buried them in medians between the roads. They buried them in any plot of land they could. And they also created mass graves. Many of these mass graves, luckily, these individuals were numbered and named inside of these mass graves in order to maintain some kind of identity for these individuals for when Ukraine eventually took back Mariupol. However, the Russians are digging up these graves and they're going to move them to their own sites, in which case most of these individuals are just simply numbered, if at all. Most of them do not get any kind of a normal grave, or identifying feature, which essentially destroys any evidence as to who this individual was without doing extensive forensics. And considering the number of people that were killed in Mariupol, which is somewhere between 20 and 22,000 at this point, and that's that's the Ukrainian estimates, I should say, that would take quite an extensive amount of time. And a lot of these, not everyone is even being buried. From our understanding and what we're hearing is the fact that if the bodies are decomposed to an extent, especially underneath the rubble, they are simply going to the landfill with the rest of the rubble. They are not even getting a mass grave. As we continue on here, filtration camp usage continues. About 2,000 people are being held in the filtration camps near Mariupol alone, says Denis Kochubey, who's the head of is the speaker of the Mariupol City Council. Erevis Shang says, why move mass graves? Well, I don't know. It sounds like a lot of work, but we're about to get into why I don't think they have a problem with that. But they, keep in mind, these graves are named and numbered. Like I said, these are supposedly named and numbered relatively, and most of these graves are named. As we've seen, they were digging. They had made homemade tombstones for these individuals that were buried in medians and parks. So you've seen plenty of photos of them, and they're removing them from the city. I understand from the mass graves it's a little bit harder, but they're moving them so that way it's possible they're moving them simply to destroy the evidence. And what I mean by destroying the evidence, they can't destroy it with a mobile crematorium, even though they have 13 in the city. They can't destroy it because those mobile crematoriums require gas lines, and there is no gas lines in Mariupol. They're all destroyed. But what they do have is they have their own mass graves, and these mass graves are only numbered. We've seen videos of it. They're only numbered. They're not named, so that removes the identity of that individual without having to conduct forensics. We know of at least 4 major grave sites, or 3 major grave sites. I apologize. We know of at least 3 major grave sites that the Russians are using, and they are filled with thousands, some of them of which have doubled in size since the last time they were photographed via satellite footage. And the reason they don't have labor issues is because residents are being forced to clear Mariupol's rubble for some water and porridge. Let's take a look. So this makes sense considering the last time that we had talked about any kind of quote-unquote humanitarian aid coming from the Russians. It was moldy bread. It was some water, some moldy bread, and shovels. Their idea of humanitarian aid is to force the individuals of Mariupol who have, unfortunately, I would say, survived the onslaught. I think if you were to have died in the Battle of Mariupol, you were probably lucky. If you survived the Battle of Mariupol, you have lost everything. You've lost your home. You've lost your family. You've lost everything. You can't feed yourself because there's no food. You can't bathe yourself unless you bathe in contaminated water, which is filled with whatever liquids are coming off of rotting corpses inside of the destroyed apartment complexes around you. You can't drink unless you drink out of these puddles of water that are contaminated. There's massive things of cholera. There's no sanitation. There's no running water. There's no electricity. There's no gas. There's no nothing. What there is there's a lot of rubble and a lot of dead people. That's it. That's all that's left in Mariupol. A lot of dead people and a lot of rubble. Because there's nothing left of the city. Before the city had fallen, the city council was saying that 90% of Mariupol was destroyed, meaning that even if the building hadn't collapsed, it would have to be demolished before, because it was no longer structurally stable enough to be used, and therefore it would need to be demolished and completely rebuilt. That's 90% of Mariupol. 22,000 people are expected to have been killed in Mariupol, and that's the estimates coming from the Ukrainians. So they brought shovels because these people to eat are expected to dig themselves out. They're expected to clear the rubble. Russia's not going to rebuild this location. They're not. They don't have the funding to fight a war, let alone rebuild an entire city of inhabitants. They're going to force these people to dig it out in order to get food and water. Bare, basic humanitarian necessities. The bare necessities of life. Food, water, shelter. Every living thing on this earth needs those 3 things. Food, water, and shelter. If they don't have those things, they die. They destroy the shelter, and you're going to work on not enough food and not enough water, and if you don't work, you're stuck with contaminated water and maybe, if you're lucky, moldy, poor bread. That's it. That's it. Meanwhile, in Russia, we've also shown you where they're taking humanitarian supplies and care packages to wounded troops. So they have it. They're just not giving it to the people that they've completely destroyed their lives. And whatever ones that aren't working or whatever, the ones that they don't want to keep around to work in Mariupol, they're forcefully deporting to filtration camps to be brutally, beaten and tortured and raped and deprived and probably summarily executed. And here we can see, I have disclaimer, do not do this. Do not do this. So, during World War II, or before World War II, the Germans developed a type of hand grenade that got nicknamed the potato masher, because it looks like a potato masher. And this style of hand grenade still exists. There are different variants, but it still exists. It's still the same basic concept. And a Ukrainian soldier has found the true purpose of the potato masher. And that is of course, making mashed potatoes. Once again, do not do this. This is a live hand grenade. Actually, I think this one's a mine, but you get the point.
Це що таке? Це граната чи що?
Це пюрешка. Може зняти є каша.
Та не важно.
А яка ти? Сколочно-фугасна? Що це за хуйня?
На потім хоч зриватися буде?
Якої сьогодні ми картошку?
А нахуй тобі, щоб вона взривалась? Ти головне, щоб вона картошку напрямляла.
Все. Хоча хулі у нас одна граната, блядь, на все відділення. З неї толку, як з мене.
Якої сьогодні гранати?
По-любому, з неї толку, як з тебе, блядь. Ну, якщо в плен будуть, блядь, забирати.
Чуєш, то як?
Це залізли всі в...
I can't express in words how dumb this is, but that is just... I get the nickname is called a potato masher, but that's not... It was a nickname. It's not meant to be actually a potato masher, guys. This is... I do not condone... I do not... This is not okay. Don't do this. Can you imagine if he, accidentally pulled the pin on this? Forget the potatoes, man. Just find a rock or something. Meltipol, once again, we see Toshka used. The Toshka U systems are, of course, being used by the Russian Federation, despite them saying that neither the Russians nor the Separatists are using them, because it's considered an obsolete and inaccurate weapon system. We've shown you multiple days in a row now where Russia has been firing and transporting these, including now here in Meltipol, where they were spotted being flatbedded and driven around the city. These are Toshka U systems. They're marked with, of course, the invasion markings. You can see the V here. They're in Meltipol, which is deep behind enemy lines. There's a truck with another insignia of the invasion, carrying it. It's an obsolete it's an obsolete weapon system, inaccurate weapon system that supposedly only Ukraine employs, according to the Russian Federation, according to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, as of the Kramatorsk attacks. I don't know what else to tell you at that point. Yeah, we debunked it then, we debunk it now. Who cares if it blows if the potatoes get cold? But yes. So anyway, the Russians are just... like I said, we got video footage. Here's them driving. Yeah, that's on the 10th. That was yesterday, where they're being flatbedded in with a bunch of MTLBs, which are also a very, very poor armor personnel carrier. There's just a ton of them. Of course, someone's posted a meme for HIMARS. Yes, the HIMARS have a new target. But these things, I mean, even the Russians themselves stated this is an inaccurate, useless weapon system that's obsolete. And they said it themselves. And we had evidence then that they are using it. Now there's a ton of it. And it's recent. I mean, there's no denying it. The Russians can't fire a Toshka U somewhere and say, oh, the Ukrainians did it now. Because there's so much evidence to the contrary. They were painted with invasion markings. They're being flatbedded through Russia. I mean, what are you going? How are you going to just? You can't just deny it. It's not easy to just deny. When there's just so much overwhelming evidence. Like, no one takes you seriously. No one will take you seriously. This is why we don't listen to like the Russian news and all of that stuff. That's why we don't actually take anything they say at face value for what it is, because there's evidence. There's overwhelming evidence usually to the contrary, with very few exceptions. We'll actually get to an exception here. But now we get into what the night is about, and that is the blast that hit Nova Kakhovka. Wow, this was a doozy of an ammunition depot. This is detonating an entire stockpile of S300 and S400 munitions. So, this supposedly what this was hit. This is a huge ammunition depot strike, and I do mean huge. It completely destroyed it. They are keeping it here in Nova Kakhovka, which is located in the Kherson Oblast, and the Russians said it was fertilizer. We actually have a quote from the Russians regarding this. We'll go ahead and take a look.
Это завод. Смотрите. Это
Now you get to see the aftermath. As put well by one of our mods, the 4th of July fireworks are just a tad bit late. Well said. But as you can see, this is a massive explosion. This isn't like a HIMARS strike, or it is a HIMARS strike probably, but it's not just the HIMARS hitting something. You know how much stuff had to go off? You know how big of an explosion? That's huge. That's insanely massive how big that had to be. That much stuff going off. We've seen very few explosions that large this entire war. I can only think of one other incident, and it created a shockwave. That was early in the war. That was within the first, I'd say, month or two of the war outside of Kyiv. So that's, a massive explosion. And the Russian response, this is from the Russian embassy to the United Kingdom. Ukraine's armed forces shelled Nova Kakhovka in Kherson region with HIMARS missiles. Hundreds of apartments destroyed, dozens of civilians wounded, at least 7 killed, many remain under rubble. Warehouses with saltpeter exploded, hospital damaged. Well, here's the problem with all of that. That would have been the HIMARS that did that. That would have been the subsequent explosion that did that, which would have been the Russians' fault for putting an ammunition depot with S300 and S400 missiles in it inside of a highly densely populated civilian area, which, by the way, is breaking the Geneva Conventions. So once again, this falls onto the Russians. Secondly, The HIMARS missile is so accurate, in fact, that it will land within 1 meter of its intended target. That is the space between me and this microphone. That is how close that the missile will land to the target that it is supposed to hit. Within 1 meter. So the HIMAR didn't do this. Your idiot C did this. And you essentially have now killed dozens of people and at least 7 dead. At least according to the Russians. Because you decided you wanted to put an S-300 missile ammunition depot in a location you already knew Ukraine could hit. Because there is no way that a HIMARS missile alone would make an explosion that large. And by the way, saltpetre is not the kind of fertilizer that would explode in this manner. The only kind of fertilizer that would explode in such a manner that I am aware of, at least, and this is to my understanding, is that saltpetre, being a fertilizer, it does not have a high concentration of ammonium nitrate. Ammonium nitrate is a highly concentrated, it's a fertilizer that's been widely used. Ammonium nitrate is highly explosive, and it was used in IED making in Iraq. It has been used in multiple terror attacks across the globe, to include the Oklahoma City bombing. That's why it's so highly regulated in every country in the world. So unless you're essentially keeping ammonium nitrate, which, once again, why would you do this? There are plenty of videos to show you why not to do this. Why would you be keeping it in a highly densely concentrated civilian population? You probably wouldn't. It's a disaster. If someone does understand saltpetrate, because I have not done a lot of research on saltpetrate, but if anyone could fill me in on that, that would be fantastic. I would like to know how explosive that fertilizer is, because I can't imagine it's probably very, very explosive, or at least not to that point. Anyway, Mykolaiv has received more shelling, so their casualties at this point are simply unknown. We've seen Mykolaiv receive an extensive amount of shelling for essentially the entire duration of the war thus far. And we continue to see that. And that was hit this morning. Take a look here.
А що там?
Once again, the Russians continue the merciless bombardment, but it's okay because much like if you have a problem with your plumbing, when you normally would call a plumber, well, now you can call a sapper if you happen to find unexploded ordnance in your garden, because there's now a listing in a local newspaper for a sapper for a hire. He has 6 years of experience and states that he has experience with Ukrainian, American, European, and Russian mines. The fact that I'm alive shows my level of professionalism. He's available anywhere from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. So, if you happen to need someone with EOD experience to get rid of that pesky cluster munition that is keeping you from picking your tomatoes, feel free to please get in contact with this individual. So you jump down here into Odessa. Odessa reportedly received more Kh-31 missiles that were sent towards Odessa. Those are supersonic missiles that were fired by an Su-30 aircraft flying over the Black Sea. Russia did end up confirming this on their state-run media news channels, that they had fired supersonic missiles from over the Black Sea via Su-30 aircraft. So, potassium nitrate, commonly known as saltpeter, that by itself is not explosive, but it can create a highly explosive exothermic reaction if in contact with reducing agents. So, essentially, it would not explode unless there was an agent to do so. Unless you had additional chemicals to cause an explosion. Meaning that it wouldn't have exploded if a missile had struck it. Thank you for Mod Riley for clearing that one up. So, no, that it wasn't saltpeter. Because saltpeter wouldn't explode unless you added chemicals to it. And no one added chemicals to any saltpeter. They just had a bunch of S-300, S-400 missiles that were currently sitting in a warehouse that is no longer on the face of the earth in Nova Kakhovka. Let this be a very important lesson for everyone. Once again, do not put your military targets in ammunition depots and highly concentrated civilian populations. Because all it does is create civilian casualties. Ammunition does not care if you're friend or foe. If it goes off, it will hurt anyone in its path. And that's the important thing to take away here. Are Ukrainian civilians dying from these ammunition depot strikes? Most certainly. Most certainly. They are dying. Because Ukraine is being forced to strike ammunition depots located within highly concentrated civilian populations. The most dangerous place to do it. You don't see ammunition depots in Moscow, by the way. You don't. You see them out in the middle of Siberia. You see them far away from their base installations. In underground bunkers. Because if one thing were to go wrong, they would detonate. And they would cause a massive amount of casualties. This is why you don't do it. People will die. Innocent people are dying. But the unfortunate reality is Ukraine has to do it. Why? Because if they don't, people will die in it anyway. They will either kill a dozen people by conducting a strike on a massive stockpile of munitions, or several hundred will die when those munitions are fired at Ukrainian positions and at Ukrainian cities, because we know that the Russians are using a scorched earth tactic, and that is the sad reality. The deaths of some to save the greater. Sacrificing for the sake of saving lives. That's a position no country and no individual should have to be in. But that is unfortunately a position with every single one of these strikes that we have seen. This S-300 battery, this S-400 battery, we just reported that the S-300 and S-400 systems have been converted into being inaccurate usage of artillery and cruise missiles. Meaning they were probably going to be fired at Mykolaiv. Much like the strike that happened, and hit apartment buildings and hit entertainment centers and hit all of these locations. Mykolaiv received 6 separate S-300 battery shells in a single day. We reported that as well. How many people would die if those missiles had been allowed to fire? Probably much greater than the number of people who have been or may have been killed by the explosion when those missiles had gone off after being hit by HIMARS. But with that, that's actually everything we have inside of Ukraine. But we have quite a decent bit of news coming out from the outside of Ukraine, including some stuff that has to deal with what's going on inside of Russia and regarding the war. And we jump up here into Kursk, where we can see the golden hour probably doesn't mean much if you're a Russian soldier. For those that don't know, the golden hour actually is a term used for the first hour after someone has been wounded in combat. The golden hour is when you have the highest life expectancy chance of survival if you've been wounded. If you get someone to a higher echelon of care within 1 hour. This hospital, located in Kursk, is roughly 45 minutes away from Kharkiv, making it the perfect place to go if you are wounded within the golden hour. There's one problem, however, is I don't think you would survive if you got to this Russian hospital just because of how poorly put together it is. Just take a look. This looks fantastic. I would just love to go. I couldn't wait to go visit my doctor if this is where I was going to. Now, granted, I give a lot of grief to the American healthcare system, okay? Trust me, I've been in it enough now that I really have nothing good to say about, one, the price, or two, the service. But I certainly can't tell you that it's better than this. Because if I had to pay the same amount for this, no thanks. I'm pretty sure you would die of infection, actually. I don't think the golden hour matters if you go to this hospital. Which, well, take that for what it's worth. If you're a wounded Russian soldier in need of medical care and the closest place is a hospital in Kursk, you're probably just going to die. As we jump up here over into Moscow, we have a couple of different things. First of all, the Russians love digging up the past and creating their very own new versions. And the first thing we have here is another thing regarding World War II. So, this is coming from the Russian delegation to the United Nations. And Polyansky said, fascism, quote, fascism is in the form of Hitler-loyal extreme nationalism isn't new to Ukraine. In 1941, German troops invading Ukraine were accompanied by Ukrainian nationalists from the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Its members eagerly collaborated with Nazis. And he has a couple of photos from those Ukrainian nationalists. Okay, that's true. Ukraine did have National Socialist parties in it. That's 100% true. We know that from history. We know that the Ukrainians, that there was a sect of Ukrainians who did collaborate with the Nazis and actually killed a pretty large number of Poles. In fact, as Poles were actually one of the larger populations immediately behind the Jewish people that were exterminated during the Holocaust. We know that this has happened. But they go on. It doesn't stop there. Once again, from the Russian delegation to the United Nations, in 1991, the ancestors of the nationalists of Nazi collaborators returned to Ukraine to start their revengeful crusade which received an immense boost after the illegal Maidan coup in 2014. Today, Ukrainian society is contaminated with the virus of Nazism 2.0. Okay. So, let's begin. All right. So, why is this brought up? Why is this such an interesting point? Well, we'll get some more on it later, but it is true. A large number of Poles were, so it's true. It's a half-truth. The historical aspect is true. There was a large group of National Socialists inside of the country of Ukraine and in the beginning of World War II. And when Nazi Germany invaded, being Nationalist Socialist, to be a Nazi, you must be a Nationalist Socialist, meaning you have to have a National Socialist ideology. In fact, that's what Nazi stands for, is the National Socialist Party of Germany, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And that is the whole point. It was a type of government at that time. That fascismo, as it was created by Mussolini, who is Europe's first dictator. Mussolini came up with the concept of fascismo, and when he conducted the coup and turned Italy into a dictatorship, Adolf Hitler shortly did the same thing thereafter. Except Adolf Hitler was just more successful at it. National Socialism, when you talk about the post-war and interwar periods between World War I and World War II, you're talking about an immense amount of despair and poverty all across Europe. And the Nationalist Workers' Party, or the National Socialist Workers' Party, were partially, while they did not like the Bolsheviks, which were which were the current ruling party, following World War I, as the Bolsheviks, also known as the Soviet Union, they were, in fact, more of Mensheviks. They were definitely more socialist. Government controls pretty much everything, but there is some kind of an organization body. It's basically a fake democracy. And that is really but that was popular. You saw it in France, you saw it in the UK, you saw it in Germany, you saw it just like you saw the Soviet Union. There's a communist party even now inside of the United States. It's not very popular, but it exists. And so does a communist party everywhere, even throughout the entire Cold War, when socialists and communists were highly persecuted against during that time, mostly because the Reds were saying they were going to take over everything, which we can see they're trying to do now. But that was a type of government in that day and age. And World War II ended that pretty successfully, if I might add, because we haven't really seen any fascism or National Socialism on the rise at any point since the end of World War II. Everyone kind of realized after the Holocaust, wow, this stuff's really bad for everybody. We probably shouldn't do this again, which is great. That's why we should never forget. But that's the truth. The truth is that in 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union, which Putin himself has stated was the greatest catastrophe to happen during the 20th century. He didn't care about World War I or World War II or the genocides, the Rwandan genocide, or literally anything that happened, the Armenian genocide, the Greco-Armenian War, or the Greco-Armenian and Turkish War. None of that mattered. None of it. The actual use of nuclear weapons didn't matter. No, the fall of the Soviet Union, in Putin's own words, stated multiple times, was the greatest catastrophe to happen in the 20th century. 1991 rolls around and the fall of the Soviet Union occurs. This means that every country in Europe essentially breaks away from Russia, or breaks away from the Soviet Union to create their own independent states. Many of these countries still, however, obviously had instability as they were starting. This allowed for Russia to expand a sphere of influence past that. That's why Belarus is still in a union with Russia. Ukraine had a pro-Russian government clear up until the Maidan Revolution, which ousted that government because it had an amazing amount of unpopularity, go figure, inside of Ukraine. A very small separatist movement began. Ukraine quickly squashed that separatist movement up until the point that the Russians began to intervene. In 2014, following the immediate squash and immediate destruction of those separatist forces and most of their gains, the Russians began supplying weapons and equipment to the Donbass and Luhansk People's Republics, or what they would call now their People Republics. And that is at that point that rebellion now has turned into an intervention on the Russian side. Now, on top of this, they start to put in troops carrying no flags or insignias to designate them as Russian forces into Crimea, in effect, and take over the territory, oust the pro-Ukrainian government that was there, and then immediately annex it into the Russian Federation. That is the sequence of events from World War II until now. There was no Nazism. No one was calling for a rule of fascism or Nazism. There have been multiple Ukrainian presidents. There is no Nazi coup and collaborators which just magically returned to Ukraine. Because Ukraine didn't have a chance for Nazi collaborators to return. Because Ukraine was liberated at the time by the Soviet Union. Which, by the way, a lot of Ukrainians died for the Soviet Union during World War II. A lot of them. An innumerable amount of them. An insane amount. The Soviet Union the Soviet Union lost more people in World War II than damn near all of the other powers combined. The casualty estimates conservatively are at 20 million. They can go up as high as 80 million. No one actually truly knows how many Russians were killed, how many Soviets were killed during World War II. So, it's first of all, also, Zelensky's Jewish. So there's no way he's a Nazi collaborator, considering his family was killed in the Holocaust. So that just completely throws out fact. That just throws out fact and how the world works to say any of this happened. There wasn't a great migration back to Ukraine, of Nazi collaborators following the fall of the Soviet Union. It just didn't happen. And if there were Nazis still left inside of Ukraine, guess what? They got persecuted and purged because Stalin was in charge, and Stalin had no problem purging people to the point that his following government, following his death, immediately ended most of his stuff because they hated him so much in his own party. And they were tired of being killed off because he would just kill people off. Everyone says never again, and then there's Putin. Yes, Will. That is entirely true. And we'll say that again about this war. This can never happen again. Which is why Russia needs to be defeated in its entirety as a military force. Russia should be demoralized to the point that they will never be able to build up their military ever again. That is what seems to be the goal by NATO and the Western powers. But Russia has proven to the world through what it has done now that it can't play nice with others. They did it in Aleppo when they bombed it, and they assisted the Assad regime in using chemical weapons against civilian populations. They did it when they used the Wagner Group to attack coalition American forces in 2018. They did it when they fought with Georgia in 2008. They did it when they bombed Grozny to the ground in the 90s and the early 2000s. They did it when they annexed Crimea. They did it when they invaded Ukraine in its entirety and just decided decided to do it with flags this time. Russia can't play nice with others, so Russia should no longer be able to play with others. So Russia, that's the thing. I don't have a problem with everyone's like, why does the West keep backing Ukraine? Why doesn't Ukraine just have to fight on its own? Because that would mean Ukraine would probably not, outlast the Russians. Why does the West continue to call for complete victory over Russia? Because Russia can't play nice with other people. They just keep killing insane amounts of civilian people. The bombing of Aleppo and Idlib, which there's more of, by the way. We have a point on that today. They just keep bombing people and keep killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people. They didn't play nice as the Soviet Union. They constantly tried to do uprisings. They purge their own people. They prosecute their own people and persecute them. It's hard to... Ervis Chang. Russia is so wild, hard to observe why a nation would suddenly become insane. That's the thing. They didn't just they didn't. Once again, you can go back to the 90s when Chechnya refused to become part of the Russian Federation. They are one of two republics that did not sign the Federation, the Articles of Federation. And what was Russia's response? Bombed them. They leveled Grozny. Grozny looked like Mariupol in the 90s. And then they did it twice. Georgia in 2008, when Georgia was looking to join the EU and NATO. They took over South Ossetia. Another bloody war. They annexed Ukraine. Or they annexed the Crimean Peninsula. They didn't wear flags. They didn't wear any identifiers. They were called the Little Green Men because of this. So they annexed the territory. They supplied weapons to a group which would have been a very small minority of people who would have been squashed relatively quickly by the Ukrainian forces, even in 2014 before they were reorganized properly under the new government. The separatists were losing terribly. They were losing absolutely terribly. It was literally farmers and pitchforks against tanks. No one wins that. No one wins that. Okay, we could do it with the American Revolution because everyone had a musket, Okay? Like, the British had a musket and you had a musket. Like, everyone has a musket because hunting's a thing, like, for survival. But farmers and pitchforks against tanks, in the off chance you have a Kalashnikov, like, it doesn't work. It just doesn't. And they were losing terribly. And then Russia decided, we're going to start funding these people a bunch of weapons and equipment and training and treating them and doing this and doing that. Basically doing exactly what the Mujahideen did against, or what the U.S. did with the Mujahideen and what Saudi Arabia and Turkey did with the Mujahideen and Pakistan during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. It just doesn't work. It's hard time fighting that. Really hard time fighting a resistance like that. And probably it was also just Russians. Just the Russians. Case then, security complex mixed with mass poverty and propaganda has been turning them against the world for the past 100 years. Yeah, I mean, it's not your average Russian's fault. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not your average Russian's fault that they would use this kind of rhetoric. It's the Russians, for essentially all of the Russian existence, have had in some way, shape, or form a strong authoritarian leader at the helm. You talk about this. You can go back and look at the ruling of the czars. You can go back to feudal systems, the ruling of the czars, and then that immediately turned into a dictatorship under Lenin, and then immediately rolling into Stalin and the rest of the leaders of the Soviet Union. Boris Yeltsin is really the outlier there, but he was drunk most of his entire term. And then immediately you have the rise of Putin, and who's another strong authoritarian leader who is a KGB agent, was very popular within the party under the Soviet Union, was very successful. So they have a lot of authoritarian leadership that they're kind of just used to. And the one time that they tried to get away from that, they had a poor choice as a president and a really weakened democracy, because the Russians found out democracy is actually really hard. Democracy is very hard. Democracy is not perfect, but it's better than dictatorship. And it's difficult. No one said it would be easy. There's a lot of corruption when your government collapses. I mean, Russia was dealt a bad hand of cards, a bad set of cards when it was when it became Russia instead of the Soviet Union. And I'll give them that. That's not an excuse to basically revert yourself into whatever you know and is comfortable with. That really stemmed progress for them. And it's unfortunate, and we see the ramifications of it now. As we continue here, the Russian party states, a Russian party here, the LDPR, has stated that Putin should be called ruler. This is a minority party in the State Duma. So this isn't exactly a lot of people, but the LDPR is a group that usually the Kremlin will use. That is the party that the Kremlin usually uses when they want to influence something in the Duma. They want to push an idea to the Duma. This has been used before, and it was brought up in 2020, and they want to do this again. And now they want to call, instead of using the word president, which is they consider it as an American idea, they want to call Putin pravitel, which is a ruler in Russian. So the Kremlin, of course, stated, according to TASS news agency, that on the LDPR's idea to replace president with ruler, they have no position. Of course, guess what? The article was deleted. Because why would you let everyone know that? Wow, that article was deleted. You're telling me Taz deleted an article that may have been controversial and may have put the Kremlin in a bad light? That's great. You know what they didn't delete? The tweet. Nice. At its finest. Anyway, going back here. Why is the war taking so long? We finally get an answer. Why is the war taking so long, guys? Why is it Why is it taking so long? I want to know the answer. Well, here we go. This is apparently in a report with Reuters. Why is the special military operation is taking so long? Because the actions of the Russian military are incremental to reduce losses among civilians. Unfortunately, collateral damage is unavoidable. Oh my god. So you're telling me you're doing this in incremental steps because you're trying to reduce civilian casualties? Please point on the map and tell me where you've tried to reduce civilian casualties. Kharkiv, I mean, Severodonetsk, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, Kherson, Mykolaiv, Bucha? No. What about Irpin? No. Berdyanka? No. Okay. Hostomel? No. Chernobyl? No, apparently not. Chernihiv? Sumy? Not those either, apparently. Slavyansk tonight. Tonight? Did you guys try to tone down the artillery barrages to save civilian populations tonight when you shelled Slavyansk, or any of the other days that you've been shelling them? No. Okay. What about Bakhmut? Have you tried minimizing civilian casualties in Bakhmut? No. Okay. Chasiv Yarsk. I heard that 38 people so far have died in Chasiv Yarsk. No. Apparently not there either. Jeez. You know, I'm starting to get a feeling that that's not why the war's taking so long, guys. I can't imagine. What about all the disappeared people? Huh? Do we have an explanation for the disappeared people? No? Okay. It's unbelievable. It really is. And I'm sorry, we on the channel have a very clear bias for Ukraine, if you haven't picked that up yet. But this is an ambassador for the Russian Federation. This is Andrei Kalin, who is the ambassador, I want to say, to the Russian Federation for the United States. And it's just, yeah. Snake Island. This is coming from Demise FPS. Snake Island. Remember, it was a goodwill gesture. Yeah. So was leaving the Kiev. So was leaving the Kiev Oblast and the Chernihiv Oblast and the Sumy Oblast. I mean, but you get the point, right? Like like we have a very clear bias for Ukraine, and I will state that very upfront. Like, we don't try to have a bias on a lot of things. We try to stay apolitical. But this war is just, it's unbelievably lopsided when it comes to what's happening. That you can't, and you only see 10, 15, maybe 20% of what we post here. Is only, 10, 15% of what we actually see just from our sources, let alone the rest of them. I mean, there's so much stuff we can't show you guys. We don't have enough information for. We can't independently confirm, all of this stuff. Like, it's stuff that we can't confirm. It's not coming from official sources. It's stuff that, we can't say with any relative certainty that it's happened. Or it's very gory, and that's a lot of it. It's a lot of gore. It's a lot of dead people. It's a lot of body parts. There's a lot of things that I just don't want to show here. It's not the kind of look I want to give this channel. There are plenty of other places to go look for that, but this is not what this channel's about. It's important to show some things, definitely not all of that, and it's very one-sided, and you can just see this from Kremenchuk, the mall in Kremenchuk. I mean, that was a catastrophe in and of itself, and there's not a whole lot to say that they're trying. We've shown here on the channel, I pulled up the Geneva Conventions, International Customary Humanitarian Law. There's no way that the Russians are being incremental to reduce losses among civilians. They're just not. They're just militarily incompetent as a group. They just suck that bad. Their military sucks that bad. And I actually got in a conversation with the guys on the Discord, and it was pretty cool to talk to some of you, and it's fantastic that you guys are very knowledgeable, by the way, and I'm really impressed. and that's awesome. I like having a really intellectual community that has these thoughtful discussions on a lot of this stuff. And the thing is that was brought up is, the Ukrainians aren't that great tactically, and it's true. They're not great tactically. They're not doing fantastic tactically, but they're better than the Russians, and that's all you really have to be, is just better than the other guys. Because in war, there's just no second place. You're winner or you're dead, and there's not really a whole lot in between. So that's just kind of how war works. There is no chance to be second place, and as long as they're better than the Russians, it's fantastic for Ukraine. And they're just getting better by the day. They're getting deadlier and more efficient by the day as guys get more experience, better training, as we can see when we get to the UK. And to say, and we're seeing these very precision strikes. Like Nova Kakhovka, the loss of civilian life there is a tragedy. But it's not purposeful. And it's not something Ukraine wants to do. All they want to do is blow up S-300 and S-400 missiles that are probably getting ready to be shot at Mykolaiv and kill hundreds of people in the process. So yeah, I would destroy it too. If I had the call between 12 people or 100 people, I'm going to kill the 12 people. I'm sorry, but that's the reality of war. It's terrible when you have to make those decisions, and it's a tragedy that you have to do it. But what you see on the Russian side is there a military objective there? 51% chance yes, 49% chance no. Launch a missile at it, because it's a 51% chance yes. And it's not even that, because it's systematic. I mean, you don't make mass graves of a bunch of innocent people and leave them lying in the street and summarily execute with their hands tied behind their backs unless it's systematic. That's not 12 people, 12 people or so, having that done. That's a war crime. That's someone took a bunch of people prisoner and executed them. That's a war crime. That's on the individual. 1,200 people? That's systematic. That's purposeful. There's a thought process behind that, because one person didn't round up 1,200 people and execute them all over the Kyiv Oblast. One person didn't bomb Mariupol into complete obliteration. That's systematic. That was done systematically. Not with precision munitions, by the way, but with Grad systems. Those are 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets, 40 of them, and they just completely destroy an entire area. They don't have any precision whatsoever. So that's the situation. But yeah, it's so preposterous. I just can't. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, that's not the only thing in Russia, because we can see here a memorial to Russian atrocities was built. This is a BMP-1 that was dedicated to those that died in Afghanistan and Chechnya. That's out of everything you could have dedicated the BMP-1 to, those are the two. Afghanistan, where they slaughtered thousands of Afghans simply because there may have been a Mujahideen fighter in that village at one point. And Chechnya, which we've already talked about to some extent on this channel, where they essentially leveled the entire country of Chechnya and brutally massacred hundreds of people, thousands of people, and used the filtration camps and filtration points during both endeavors, both the First and Second Chechen Wars, in which case war crimes have been prosecuted by the International Criminal Court and found guilty of summary execution and, just basic crimes against humanity. So you dedicated it to those two things. And then a Z was also now marked onto this monument for the beginning of the special operation, quote unquote, and has now turned into Azov. This is ridiculous. Oh, the Russians. We get into the rest of Europe, though. And going back to the historical context here, this is for those that say Poland wants its land back. The president of Poland visited Ukraine and stated that the that Poland would not take revenge on Ukrainians for the Volyn massacre. And he also stated that he called on he also called that Ukraine to recognize the fact that a genocide was committed by Ukrainian nationalists during World War II, where more than 100,000 Poles were killed. So all he just wants to say today is the fact that the Ukrainian nationalists killed over 100,000 Poles in a genocide during a massacre during World War II, but they're not going to persecute, because that's what we do in the 21st century, because most of the people who would have been involved in this are probably dead, if not by age, then definitely by the Russians. Jump over here into the Netherlands, where firefighters have joined the protests with farmers from the Netherlands who oppose new environmental amendments that would oblige or basically obligate farmers to re-equip their farms at their own expense to reduce nitrogen emissions. Basically, this law is requiring the farmers here in the Netherlands to pay out of pocket to reduce emissions from nitrogen on their own farms with no help from the government. And the government's not going to pay a cent on this, but they will pay a cent on enforcement. And basically they will shut down their operations if they refuse to do this. And to say the least, the farmers aren't very happy, because farmers don't exactly make a whole lot of extra money. Most of that goes into, equipment and supplies, and you really have a slim profit margin unless you're subsidized. And farmers don't necessarily make a lot of farm subsidies have been cut globally, unless you live in a more poor developing country in the world. And so this greatly impacts any kind of profit that a farmer would make off of his living. Take a look. Anyway, as we go over here, we can see that Ukrainian troops are training underneath the British, and we continue to see that. So these are British instructors who are training Ukrainians how to operate as basic infantrymen. Very basic skills. They're not going through a very long course, but it is a very thorough course. And we can see a bunch of evidence regarding that. They're doing a lot of live fire training. They're learning how to operate their weapon systems, maneuver with basic tactics, operate in air assaults, that kind of thing, which is fantastic. They're giving them as best training as they can in a very short amount of time, and it can be done. It can be done very well. Most troops for World War II had the training of about 6 to 8 weeks. So was not an extensive amount of time. We know the Ukrainian troops have been there for a little bit now. And there's just over 1,000 of them, if I remember correctly. And these are just the basic skills needed to operate, to employ themselves and their weapons effectively on the front lines, which they know they're getting ready to go to. So these guys know what they're getting ready to get into, and that usually helps when it comes to training, and it usually helps them remember what they're being taught, because they know that these are skills that they're going to be needing when they get there. We can go ahead and take a look here.
Magazine. And carry on firing.
We are training the partner forces, the Ukrainian soldiers, in basic soldiering. We're starting off with simple skill at arms, which is how to handle your weapon, how to handle it safely and correctly. We'll then employ that on live fire ranges and building up their basic marksmanship so that they can, what they aim at, they hit. I think it goes to show that the ability of the Ukrainians to repel their enemy means that Orbital has worked very well. Other than that, they just seem motivated, keen. They want to do well, they want to perform well. They know what they're going up against in 3 weeks' time. So ultimately, they know the reality of their situation, and so do we.
That's coming straight from the Ministry of Defense. So pretty important thing. I mean, it takes a lot. You don't think this. A lot of people just, a lot of people have this negative connotation to the infantry, that the infantrymen are in general just kind of stupid trigger pullers. But to be a good infantryman, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of knowledge. You have to be insanely smart, believe it or not, because everything is trying to kill you, and you're trying to prevent that from happening for not just yourself, but everyone else too. And weapons employment, I mean, just basic riflemen are intelligent, all beyond intelligent in a lot of fashions. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, everyone I knew in the military was weird in one way or another, but they were extremely intelligent. And you have to, you have to understand that, and you have to understand that there's not a lot of time to learn these skills. A lot of this is developed through experience. A lot of this is developed through continual training and follow-on training and practicing these skills. And so what they learn here, it wouldn't matter if it was a 6-week course, an 8-week course, or if it was a 12-month course. Okay, until they get that experience on how things actually work. You can do doctrine all you want, but doctrine will likely get you killed. I mean, look at the Russians. The doctrine will likely get you killed. You have to know when to deviate from doctrine. You have to know, how to employ your weapon system to best fit your scenario and to put you at the most advantageous position. And that's only going to come with time and learning on the job. So it's very good that they're getting trained by Western partners, though, and that allows them to train in a safe environment, which they haven't really had. They've still been training in Western Ukraine, and that is still reachable by several different types of weapon systems that Russia can employ. And it means that they've been we do know that the Russians have been targeting some of their training installations that have led, unfortunately, to the death of many recruits. But this should definitely help them. It's going to field roughly, according to the United Kingdom, up to 10,000 Ukrainian troops. And these troops are going to be Western trained. They're going to know how to operate. They're going to know basic tactics. They're going to know how to employ themselves. It's going to make them effective, efficient killers on the battlefield. And that's something that they can now go back and they can train their friends who weren't trained by Western powers how to do these basic tactics. And that increases the survivability of infantrymen in the field who are now embedded with these new guys. I think that's... So there is a lot of training happening. This is coming... So Demise FPS says, I feel the 82nd Airborne should be training Ukrainians in Poland to build up their readiness for their forces so there are less casualties. And so there is a lot of training going on. I'm sure there's a lot more training than what we hear about. So the Ukrainians had to learn how to use HIMARS somewhere. They had to learn how to use 777s from somewhere. They had to learn how to use a lot of Western equipment somewhere. And a lot of that's happening in Poland. A lot of it is happening all over Europe. And we don't hear about it nearly as much. It was the great numbers that we heard about. And the United Kingdom was very upfront about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. Now, a lot of that stuff other countries aren't so willing to admit, at least in large numbers. But I'm sure they are getting training. I'm sure there are groups of Ukrainians right now training on some kind of weapon system that is going to be given to them in a future, future training. I'm sure that, we heard about the HIMARS. We're giving Ukraine those HIMARS. I guarantee that's probably before we heard about it. I guarantee you that Ukrainians were already being pulled and being trained on how to use HIMARS systems. So that way, the follow-on courses that had even more guys come could, have translators and Ukrainians that can teach them, hey, this is how you actually do this, and teach them in their own language. I'm sure that kind of thing is happening all over Europe at this point in time. It's probably maybe not to as much of a grand scale as we would like to see as someone, probably a viewer from the West, but that is the reality, and a lot of it we just don't hear about. It's not something that you necessarily want to advertise. And I'm sure the United Kingdom probably was already training a decent amount of troops, but they probably are just now putting up an actual rotational training program for Ukrainian basic infantry, new recruits. These guys are fresh recruits from Ukraine. These guys aren't already troops being trained on a battlefield or in those tactics. They're not trained Ukrainian soldiers. These guys are new, fresh recruits. They just signed up for the Ukrainian military. They don't know how to be a soldier yet. At least the guys at the front currently do. As we jump down here into the Middle East, we have a couple of different points. The first one is up here in the northwestern part of Syria, where the Islamic State field commander Mahar al-Ghal was killed along with his companion when a coalition UAV hit his motorcycle in the canton of Afrin. The incident occurred near the town of Jandaras, located about 8 kilometers within the border of Turkey. According to the U.S. military, one of the dead was a high-ranking Islamic State fighter and one of the top 5 leaders of the group. Separately, he's also the highest leader of the Islamic State inside of Syria. The first thing we got from this is from Lucas Tomlinson. Here it is, U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, Public Affairs Office press release. There's what's left of the motorcycle, not a whole lot. It's not the only thing. Once again, Idlib is being bombed by the Russians. The Russian aerospace forces began to strike at the territories controlled by the pro-Turkish militants in Idlib, namely the village of Balshon and the Jabal Zawiya region. And several other settlements were hit by the artillery of the Syrian army. There are no informations at this point regarding victims and casualties. In the mid 2010s, once Russia brought its military forces into the country of Syria, they immediately began to assist the Assad regime with bombing strategic points for the Assad regime and areas of resistance, most notably Aleppo and Idlib. The Russians, along with the Syrian National Army, essentially leveled the cities of Idlib and of Aleppo and Idlib, and included the use of the Russians facilitated the use of chemical weapons, mainly chlorine gas, by the side of the Assad regime, and used it against civilian targets inside of those cities. The individual who is in command of these forces back in 2016 is actually the one who is he's nicknamed the Butcher of Syria, and he is currently in command of the armed forces of Russia that are currently located inside of Ukraine. I'm going to jump up over here in Syria where we can... Oh, that's the same thing. Sorry, I forgot to delete a point. We originally didn't know where that was at. Anyway, going on from that, we move over here into the Jammu and Kashmir, where the Islamic State, or an Islamic State fighter, attacked a police checkpoint. This is located in the Lal Bazar district of Srinagar, within the Kashmir and Jammu. And one of the officers was killed during the shootout, and 3 more policemen were injured. The weapon of the killed security forces official went to the attacker as a trophy when he fled the scene. The Islamic State did claim responsibility for that attack. Just jump down here into Africa. The first thing we have is out of Basaso, which is where several high-ranking officials were killed when the Puntland Autonomous Region Armed Forces engaged in a firefight with Puntland Marine Police Forces. The incident occurred near the airport of Bosaso, which is here in Somalia. According to preliminary data, 4 security officials were killed during the shootout, and according to one version of the conflict, it was due to a visit by high-ranking officials led by the first vice speaker of the Somali parliament, which was opposed by the police. To move over here into Togo, we can see that an explosion, a suspected improvised explosive device, ended up killing at least 7 people, specifically children, and injuring an additional 2 near Natigul, which authorities have launched an investigation to identify the cause of the blast and apprehend the perpetrators, but nobody has taken responsibility for the blast itself. The Islamic State is known to be operating pretty heavily within these regions, to include Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Benin, Togo, Niger, and Nigeria. As we move over here. So, a Starship booster ended up exploding unexpectedly during a SpaceX ground test. It was located here in Texas, at their Boca Chica Boulevard, or their Boca Chica space basically location, spaceport. And in the midst of the test for the Starship rocket during its inaugural orbital launch, the booster ended up exploding on the Super Heavy booster during the test, which represents a rather serious outback. A cloud of well-mixed methane and oxygen gas was accidentally ignited and functioned like a small fuel air bomb, similar to the aerosol bombs that are being used in inside of Ukraine by the TOS-1A systems. We can take a look at this. So that is the detonation. This is from their starbase here in Boca Chica. Oh, my bad. Apparently there are more pictures regarding that attack in Boca Chica. I apologize about that. So the thing about Somalia is kind of interesting. Just jumping back a little bit here. So the thing about Somalia is rather interesting. Somalia essentially doesn't have a coherent government. For the last 30 years, they've essentially been in a complete and utter civil war. This is why things like the Battle of Mogadishu took place. Now, a lot of that has calmed down. They've been reforming their government to an extent, and it has, some general control over the country, but it's very general, and it's still not a great stable situation inside Somalia, to the point that peacekeeping forces could possibly be needed, or additional peacekeeping forces. There are other peacekeeping forces going on or inside of Somalia, but there's also a lot of terrorist activity as well. And groups like Al-Shabaab is currently, which is an Al-Qaeda linked, Al-Qaeda affiliated sister group, and they have a lot of power inside of Somalia. They have a lot of military power, militant power, and to the point they actually have overwhelmed military forces from other nations assisting Somalia, such as over here. They had a Burundi base down here in the south of nothing but Burundi armed forces that were completely killed off by the Al-Shabaab militant group when they took over an entire military installation. So it's not a great political situation in Somalia, and on top of that, they're in the worst drought they've ever had in 40 years. It's affecting the entire Horn of Africa, which is one of the reasons why we have in the description we have a couple of different organizations for this region, because children under the age of 5, specifically between Ethiopia and Somalia, children under the age of 5 are especially at risk because of the situations ongoing here. A lot of them millions are suffering from acute malnutrition, millions more are suffering from severe malnutrition, that puts them in the risk of death. They're expecting millions of children to actually die and be affected by this. So pretty serious situation overall. So we have a couple of different things. We're actually going to start off over here in Europe and move our way back over. This is out of St. Petersburg, where Russian scientists have learned how to use cobwebs for stitching wounds. Though medicine has made rather huge strides in recent years, 10 to 20% of all patients still fall victim to infection-related post-operative complications. This caused usually by sterilization issues or overly resistant bacteria that are located in hospitals, the super bugs that you hear about. And since the infection sites are typically hard to detect, scientists here in St. Petersburg have created a new suture material that is made of that will make it possible to track the spread of infection in real time. The development is a multifunctional material consisting of two components: a frame made with spider silk and a filler using carbon dots. And the spider silk has long been known for spectacular mechanical and biological properties. So if you want some more info, we do have a news link down here for you at IPMO. And you jump over here into Gothenburg, which is located in Sweden, where an AI wrote a scientific paper on itself. So a researcher in Sweden gave an AI algorithm known as GPT-3 a simple directive: write an academic thesis in 500 words about GPT-3 and add scientific references and citations inside the text. That's coming from researcher Almira Osmanovic Thunstrom, who said she stood in awe as the text began to generate. In front of her was what she called a fairly good research introduction that GPT-3 wrote about itself. And so we can go ahead and take a look here. This is the actual input. Can GPT-3 write an academic report on itself with minimal human input? And it's quite long. It's 500 words. But HAL is a multidisciplinary open access archive for the deposit of dissemination of scientific research documents, whether they are published or not. The document may come from teaching and research institutions in France or abroad, or from public and private research centers. L'archive, okay, so he put it in French. Introduction. GPT-3 is a machine learning platform that enables developers to train and deploy AI models. It is also said to be scalable and efficient in the ability to handle large amounts of data. Some have called it a game changer in the field of AI, O'Reilly 2016. GPT-3 has been used in a number of different applications, including image recognition, natural language processing, and predictive modeling. In each case, GPT-3 has demonstrated its potential to improve upon existing methods, Lee 2016. This thing wrote about itself. This is crazy. Conflict. So it gave statements and declarations. The main author's data usage was funded by the second author's salary amount of $3.29 USD. The second and third author's time was funded by the Department of Psychiatry at the Salgoranska University Hospital. And it also stated that no authors have any conflicts of interest to declare. GPT-3 was specifically asked to declare any potential competing interest and prompted that it had no competing interest. It even gave its own disclaimer. That is... that is amazing. That is insane. That's scary, actually. Up here in Edinburgh, the brain has a low power mode, which scientists just discovered, that actually lowers our senses. Neuroscientists at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, have now revealed that an energy-saving strategy is in the visual systems of mice. They found out that when mice were deprived of sufficient food for weeks at a time, long enough for them to lose 15 to 20% of their typical healthy weight, neurons in the visual cortex will reduce the amount of ATP used and their synapses by a sizable 29%. This new mode of processing came with a cost to perception. It impaired how mice saw details of the world based on the neurons in a low power mode. Processed visual signals less precisely. The food restricted mice performed worse on challenging individual tasks. So there's an actual article for this at Cell.com. You can also read it at Quantum Magazine if you want to read further on this. Keep in mind that this map is available on our website. If you go to our works, we have it set out for each individual day since we've had this archive. So you can read all of this stuff and look at it yourself for further information. Here at the UN has predicted the world's population once again with its own revised studies. In a few months, the world population is going to be marked at 8 billion people. That's insane. But the UN, at least that's according to the UN prediction, and by 2050, the number of inhabitants on Earth are going to reach 9.7 billion, according to their prediction. At the same time, this world population, while it is still growing, is growing at the slowest pace it has since 1950. It's important to note that we will peak reportedly at 10.9 billion people in 2100. If you want to go and check out more on that, you can go check out at news.un.org, which is the UN's official news section. And over here, a DNA typewriter encodes full sentences into living cells. Researchers at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the HHMI, have demonstrated a DNA typewriter by encoding full sentences into DNA, which may be eventually functional as a cellular black box. As impressive as our own digital information storage systems are, they pale in comparison with nature's. And the DNA has been an incredible dense medium, with a single gram able to store up to 215 million gigabytes of data, and possibly even more, because we truly don't know, with some tweaking anyway. Unfortunately, it's hard to, and unfortunately, writing to and reading from DNA remains a fiddly process. They are currently working on a new system to record information from DNA and sequentially, so they can map out some of the genome. The DNA typewriter, as they call it, inserts short segments of DNA into a blank DNA tape, one after another, from left to right. The team has created as many as 4,096 specific symbols that can be inserted, and demonstrated that the DNA typewriter can lay them out in order to form full sentences that they can read back later. So if you want to learn more, you can look at newatlas.com, which the link is also here. And finally, to wrap up our night, a huge development when it comes to stargazing right here at the NASA Goddard Center. The James Webb Telescope has revealed the first full image. This image is amazing. These images are amazing. So this is a dawn of a completely new era. So the first thing we want to do is you have to understand and appreciate how far we've come along in our technology to be able to map our universe and take a look at our universe. This is the deepest we will ever look into our past. To go back any further, so the way with how far light comes throughout the universe, with as far back as so that's looking back in time. Every time you're looking at light, you're looking at time, because every time you look at a star, that's a star billions of light years away. It means it took billions of years for the light to reach you here on Earth. It took billions of years. And with this telescope, it's so powerful, it can see so far, that to look any farther, nothing exists, because the Big Bang, it hadn't cooled down. Star formation hadn't happened. Light, as we know it, didn't exist past the point in which this telescope can see, which is amazing. So this is the first full color images. We saw, obviously, their test image, but we have even more now. It was broadcasted live, or televised at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, this morning. So you guys can go and check it out. But this is from the NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center here in Greenbelt, Maryland. And this is some of the first full images that we can see. So this is coming straight from NASA. This is the Carina Nebula. This is Stephan's Quintet. The Southern Ring Nebula. The WASP 96b with its atmospheric compensations here, which is a hot gas exoplanet. And this is the more famous photograph that has been released and was released by the President of the United States. This is the SMACS 0723. And you can see all of the different galaxies and nebulas and everything that are essentially in our universe. But this is as far back as you can physically look, because past this, light hasn't happened yet. All these little specks out here, light hasn't occurred yet past those. This is quite literally some of the pinnacle of our existence in some ways. But to give you an idea, here's a comparison of different photos from earlier. So this is the WISE W2 on 6.4, and these are all the same image. So this is an early infrared image. This is kind of a moderate. This is from the Spitzer IRAC, which increased the quality of the image, obviously. So these are the exact same images, and then obviously that is the image now. This is coming straight from the James Webb Telescope. So this is the exact same images, exact same locations, but they're all, obviously you can see the progression that we have made now. And this kind of a progression helps you truly understand, how much more we'll be able to understand about our universe, being able to see it this clearly. So it's amazing. Now that is now the James Webb Telescope is about 1.5 million miles from Earth. Pretty significant distance, but it's not currently the furthest thing from Earth. There is one much further, and that is the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 spacecraft, which are actually, Voyager 1 is currently flying in interstellar space. So it's the first man-made object to actually cross it into interstellar space, which it did so back in 2012. It's roughly 14.5 billion miles from Earth, in case you're wondering how far that is. Anyway, we jump down here into Melbourne, where an Australian company has unveiled the world's first quantum integrated circuit. So this is based off of 20 years of scientific research, by the way. And it's a young company. It's the Silicon Quantum Computing, or SQC. And they've created the world's first quantum integrated circuit. The chip is able to simulate the behavior of just one molecule, polyacetylene. But it does that much better than classical computers, essentially. The SQC's quantum processor is an analog solution for simulating the quantum states for molecules, and the company still only dreams of a real quantum processor with the ability to correct the errors, but even a molecule simulator promises a breakthrough in the field once such chips are commercially produced. Basically, if they can produce this thing, people can improve upon it. This is the next big step into having quantum computers. You think supercomputers now are amazing and how much they can compute and how much power they have. No. Quantum computers essentially unlock limitless potential, limitless processing. Essentially. One quantum computer can essentially outdo every computer in the world combined, if created, in how much it can process. So this kind of work, this kind of a process is amazing. This is another step. It's another baby step, but it's a step into the direction of having limitless computing potential, being able to figure out problems that would take us hundreds of if not thousands of years to solve with a normal everyday analog computers, which we have now. This could take just a few seconds if they built a quantum computer. So it's amazing to be able to do this. So Max Cruz says, imagine if NASA was given the 10% of the DoD budget. Yeah, NASA, that would be pretty cool. But you guys can go and check this one out. This is at Roge.com as well as Nature.com if you guys want to check out for more info on this. But yeah, it's amazing. The advancements today and all this really cool stuff that's coming out today is really quite amazing. It's a lot of big developments. I mean, keeping people from dying from infection, an AI that can write about itself. I mean, the James Webb Telescope, quantum computers, all of it. I mean, being able to write DNA, like that's how you change people. It's a step into being able to change people. I mean, being able to code new DNA. I mean, you're literally talking about, you don't want your child to have brown eyes, let's give it green eyes, or blue eyes, or purple eyes, or whatever eyes. Like gray eyes. You could do anything. Contacts, no need. Just do it. You could do it. I mean, that's a step in that direction. And it's something that a lot of people are, a lot of things, talking about. I mean, that's humanity is moving towards the future. While in some ways, such as with the war in Ukraine and with other crises going on throughout the world, we may be moving back, maybe 2 steps forward and a step back. Humanity is overall used to overcoming challenges and going towards the future. And luckily, we continue to do that despite all of the terrible things going on in the world. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't help as we wrap up the news tonight. We can help thanks to you guys. You guys have made this an awesome community. I'm really happy that you guys are involved with this and that you guys continue to support not just us, but more importantly, the organizations in the description. As you'll see, if you check out the description, there are a ton of different organizations which we have vetted and gone through. 80% or more of the donations that you'll receive go to actually helping people with their program. So be sure to check those all out. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's fine. Give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us, because the more people that come here, more people that can enjoy the channel, enjoy what we're all about, and of course, the more people that can donate, and that's the important part. The more people that are here, the more good we will overall be able to do. We want to be able to put donations directly to the stream at some point. That only helps with word of mouth. So thank you guys for supporting us, and please, and thank you for also supporting those organizations. Keep in mind, we're never going to be doing super chats on this channel or anything. So we're pushing merchandise. All of that is going straight to charity. So someone just commented, Max Crew just commented, we should send Paul into space. No, thank you. I am okay with my feet on the ground. I've had some personally bad flight experiences, so I will personally stay here on the ground. I very much love my significant other and would not like to be separated from them for a prolonged period of time again. So, but other than that, moving aside. So I hope you guys, though, have a fantastic rest of your night and early morning for the rest of you. I hope that you guys have a fantastic Wednesday, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. But please be safe. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I hope that you do find that safety and security in the near future. And hopefully you join us back once again tomorrow for another 24 hours of news updates. So thank you guys for joining us. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night, everybody.